We both want to wish the Lionesses the best of luck for tonight. You've done amazingly well in the competition and we're rooting for you all the way.
Good luck, I hope you win.
The palace dropped a bombshell that left the entire nation reeling when Princess Charlotte, the beloved young royal who has captured hearts worldwide, mysteriously vanished from the official line of succession. What insiders later revealed about this shocking removal threatened to upend everything the public believed about the monarchy's future. On what appeared to be a routine morning at Buckingham Palace on November 28, 2025, officials were preparing a standard annual update to the royal website, an administrative formality that rarely drew public attention, when it instead ignited the most explosive constitutional crisis the monarchy had faced in decades. Sarah Jenkins, a junior digital officer in the palace communications team, was the first to notice something was terribly wrong. As she cross-referenced the updated succession documents with the official database, her hands began to tremble. Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, third in line to the throne and the cherished daughter of the Prince and Princess of Wales, was gone, not moved down the list or repositioned, but completely removed. Within minutes, the discovery reached Sir Clive Alderton, the King's private secretary, whose face reportedly drained of color as he reviewed the documents. This was no clerical error. The removal was official, authorized at the highest levels of palace administration, and signed off by officials whose authority was unquestionable. The reason behind Princess Charlotte's removal remained a mystery that sent shockwaves through every corner of the establishment. By 9:30 that morning, emergency meetings were already underway as senior courtiers gathered in the Belgian suite, their voices hushed but urgent amid an atmosphere thick with tension. Questions piled up rapidly. How had this happened? Who had authorized it? And how much time remained before the media uncovered what was arguably the most significant royal story of the decade? The palace's first instinct was damage control, lock down the information, and issue a brief statement citing an administrative review to buy time before the 24-hour news cycle took over. But insiders knew such secrecy was impossible in an age of digital transparency and leaks. The timing only deepened the confusion. Just 3 weeks earlier, Princess Charlotte had attended a state dinner at Windsor Castle, her poise at 9 years old drawing comparisons to her late grandmother, Diana, and reinforcing her image as a symbol of the monarchy's hopeful future. Now, without warning or explanation, she had been erased from the line of succession. King Charles was informed shortly after 10:00 a.m., and sources described his reaction as complete bewilderment. He had authorized no such action, nor had Prince William, suggesting the order had emerged from deep within the palace's labyrinthine bureaucracy, where ancient protocols and modern governance collide. By midday, Prince William was rushing back to London from Norfolk while Catherine was informed via encrypted call, the shock of learning that their only daughter had been removed from the succession palpable. The implications went far beyond protocol, touching Charlotte's identity, future, and place within an institution her family had served for generations. As the afternoon wore on, palace lawyers and constitutional experts were summoned. Historical documents some centuries old were pulled from the archives, and all searched for legal justification, because in Britain's constitutional monarchy no royal is removed from the succession without cause, precedent, and law. By sunset, the palace remained in crisis mode under a strict media blackout, and the truth emerging behind closed doors was far more complex and disturbing than anyone expected. Legal documents uncovered that day revealed deep institutional dysfunction, pointing to an ancient, nearly forgotten clause activated during updates to modern royal protocols, one that disproportionately affected female heirs. Despite the equal succession laws of 2013, which secured Charlotte's position ahead of her younger brother Louis, those reforms were not as comprehensive as believed. The crisis traced back to the Act of Settlement of 1701 and obscure amendments added in 1763 under King George III, never repealed because they were assumed obsolete. Written in dense 18th century legal language, the provisions allowed for the temporary removal of a female heir between the ages of 7 and 16 under conditions related to education, religious instruction, and assessments of moral character, a product of an era anxious about Catholic succession and foreign influence, when female heirs were seen as especially vulnerable. Barbaric by modern standards, the clause nonetheless remained legally valid, exposing a hidden constitutional fault line that no one had imagined still had the power to reshape the monarchy's future. The 2013 Succession to the Crown Act had been celebrated as a landmark victory for gender equality, modernization, and bringing the monarchy into the 21st century. It ensured that an older daughter could not be displaced by a younger son, a milestone long hailed as progress. Yet it had overlooked older, obscure provisions, ancient clauses that had never been formally repealed or even acknowledged. Constitutional expert Professor Helena Blackwood, brought in to advise the palace, described the situation as a perfect storm of oversight and assumption. Everyone had believed that decades of gender equality legislation had eliminated all discriminatory royal succession laws, and no one had conducted a thorough audit of centuries-old legislation. After all, the monarchy had functioned smoothly for years, with no apparent crisis until one suddenly emerged. The trigger, as it turned out, came from an unexpected source, a routine review by the Lord Chancellor's office in late October. While modernizing record-keeping systems, civil servants discovered these ancient provisions and, following procedure, activated the legally mandated assessment process for Princess Charlotte. There was no malice, no conspiracy, no plot against a 9-year-old girl. It was bureaucracy operating at its most coldly efficient. Charlotte had turned 9 in May, and the wheels of government had turned, resulting in her temporary removal from the succession list pending completion of the required assessments. The assessments themselves, however, were particularly cruel. Designed for an era when royal education, religious instruction, and moral judgment adhered to standards unrecognizable today, the criteria were outdated and rooted in assumptions about female capacity and virtue long rejected by modern society. Palace lawyers faced an impossible dilemma. The law was clear, had never been repealed, and under the British constitutional monarchy, the rule of law applied even to its most absurd manifestations. Legislation could not simply be ignored because it was inconvenient or embarrassing. The proper legal process had to be followed, no matter how archaic. Proper channels, amendment, repeal, parliamentary process were the only way to resolve the situation, but that process would take months, possibly years. In the meantime, Princess Charlotte remained officially removed from the line of succession, and the palace could not even acknowledge the issue publicly without igniting a media firestorm that would dwarf recent controversies. On the morning of November 29th, the crisis deepened. Legal experts examining the 1763 amendments discovered additional, astonishing provisions. Not only could Charlotte be temporarily removed during the assessment period, but failure to meet the archaic criteria could result in permanent disqualification, legally barring her from ever becoming queen regardless of birth order. The criteria themselves were shocking proficiency in specific religious texts, demonstration of needlework skills, and evidence of a submissive and gentle temperament standards by which 18th century lawmakers believed a future queen should be judged. These were hurdles for Princess Charlotte, a thoroughly modern child of the 21st century. Senior palace officials, reading the documents in disbelief, immediately grasped that the threat was existential not just to Charlotte's position, but to the entire premise of the modern monarchy. How could an institution claim relevance or reflect national values when it remained governed by laws that treated women as lesser beings, requiring special scrutiny and control? The constitutional crisis extended beyond Charlotte. Any future female heir, including potential daughters of Prince George, would be subject to the same archaic rules. The monarchy's efforts at modernization had been built on fragile assumptions, leaving centuries-old prejudices embedded in law, waiting to resurface. By the end of the second day, the palace recognized that this was not a mere administrative error, but a confrontation with 3 centuries of institutional sexism that had been left intact under the false assumption it had naturally faded. On the morning of November 30th, Prince William and Princess Catherine received the full briefing at Adelaide Cottage, their usual sanctuary transformed into a war room, as lawyers and advisors outlined the impossible situation facing their daughter. Catherine, known for her composure even in trying circumstances, finally broke down in tears not only for Charlotte, but for every woman who had been deemed not quite good enough, every daughter judged by different standards than her brothers. William's reaction was one of pure, barely contained fury at a system he had dedicated his life to serving, raised to honor tradition yet suddenly confronted by the raw injustice hidden within it. Prince William, raised to honor tradition and put duty above personal feeling, recognized that this was not tradition, it was discrimination dressed in ceremonial robes. His daughter was being told that her gender made her suspect, less than, and vulnerable to removal in ways her brothers would never face. The couple's initial instinct was to go public immediately, hold a press conference, and let the force of public outrage dismantle these medieval provisions. But their lawyers urged caution. A premature public response without strategy or political backing risked triggering a constitutional standoff that could irreparably damage the monarchy. Instead, William took swift action behind the scenes, calling the Prime Minister in a frank conversation stripped of diplomatic niceties. He made clear that this was not an arcane legal curiosity but a matter of his daughter and the future of the crown, demanding emergency legislation. The Prime Minister, sympathetic but constrained by political realities, acknowledged the urgency while warning of challenges. Parliament was gridlocked, cross-party support was needed, and some MPs, particularly among traditional conservatives, might exploit the crisis to grandstand about constitutional orthodoxy and the dangers of rapidly changing centuries-old law. Meanwhile, Catherine pursued a more personal approach, reaching out to women across the political spectrum: MPs, lawyers, activists, and anyone with influence. Her message was simple. This was not just about Charlotte. It was about societal commitment to equality and whether true equality could exist when deeper structures of discrimination remained untouched. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours, a coalition of women's rights organizations, legal reform groups, and even members of the House of Lords who had long championed equality had rallied in horror at the survival of these archaic provisions. The palace may have wished to keep the matter quiet, but William and Catherine understood that silence would equal complicity. Privately, they made another resolute decision. Charlotte would not undergo the archaic assessment process. They refused to subject their daughter to examinations grounded in outdated notions of female propriety, even if it meant she would remain off the succession list indefinitely. Some principles, they decided, were far more important than position or protocol. Principles, William and Catherine agreed, were more important than position. Their stance immediately put them in conflict with palace officials, who feared the constitutional implications. Openly defying legal requirements, even unjust ones, risked setting a dangerous precedent, suggesting that royals could selectively follow laws and undermining the very foundation of the constitutional monarchy. William's response was blunt. The Constitution had already been compromised, not by their actions, but by allowing discriminatory provisions to remain in effect, by failing to conduct proper legal audits, and by assuming that social progress automatically translated into legal reform. The failure lay with generations of lawmakers and officials who had been too complacent to enact real change. The first weekend of December found William and Catherine at Sandringham in emergency talks with King Charles. The king was sympathetic, sharing their outrage, but he also carried the weight of responsibility for the institution. Every decision now would resonate for decades. They needed to act strategically as well as righteously. The conversation stretched late into the night, with Charles voicing his own frustrations with royal protocol and the constraints he had endured his entire life, while emphasizing the delicate balance the monarchy maintained. They existed at the pleasure of the people, governed by laws made by Parliament. If they were seen as placing themselves above even terrible laws, public support could evaporate. By Sunday evening, a strategy had been formulated. The family would comply with legal requirements only to the minimum extent necessary, while simultaneously pushing for emergency reform. Charlotte would be made available for assessment, but every outdated and sexist criterion she was expected to meet would be publicized. The process itself would become a public indictment of the system that had created it. This approach was risky, deliberately courting controversy at a time when the monarchy could least afford negative headlines. But William and Catherine had reached a point of clarity. They would not sacrifice their daughter's dignity to protect an institution that refused to protect her. If the monarchy could not survive treating Charlotte with basic equality and respect, perhaps it did not deserve to survive at all. The decision was made on December 2nd, just 4 days after the initial discovery. The Wales family would break their silence. They would tell the British public exactly what was happening to Princess Charlotte and challenge the establishment to defend the indefensible. What no one anticipated, however, was the intervention of Queen Consort Camilla. Having largely stayed out of succession politics, mindful of her own complicated public position, she requested a private meeting on the evening of December 1st. Camilla arrived at Adelaide Cottage alone, without her usual staff, requesting discretion, a request Catherine honored. The two women sat in the conservatory, tea growing cold, as Camilla revealed what she knew. For weeks she had been hearing whispers in palace corridors about assessments and historical protocols, but had paid them little mind until the crisis erupted. Unexpectedly, she had gone through her own files, digging into decades of palace bureaucracy, and uncovered something remarkable. These same provisions had almost been triggered for other female royals in the past. They had been quietly circumvented paperwork filed in ways that technically satisfied the law without subjecting anyone to actual assessments. The revelation stunned Catherine. This wasn't unprecedented. It had happened before, handled discreetly to protect those involved. The difference was that previous cases involved royals with lower public profiles or occurred in eras of limited media scrutiny. Charlotte's case, by contrast, had gone public too quickly for such quiet maneuvering. Camilla's message was clear. There was a path through the crisis that didn't require public confrontation. Palace officials knew how to navigate these archaic requirements, managing Charlotte's assessment in ways that would be swift, quiet, and ultimately return her to the succession list within weeks. It would be theatrical and privately demeaning, but it would work. Catherine's response was vehement. Absolutely not. She refused to subject her daughter to a charade designed to satisfy laws that should never have existed. She would not teach Charlotte to tolerate discrimination when the alternative was uncomfortable. Some fights, she decided, were worth having regardless of the cost. Camilla listened, expression unreadable, then smiled a warm, knowing smile. Her offer to smooth things over had been a test. She wanted to see whether Catherine understood what was at stake and had the resolve to see it through. Then Camilla revealed something transformative. She was prepared to publicly support the Wales family. She would give interviews, speak at events, and make clear that the Queen Consort herself found these provisions abhorrent and demanded their repeal. Coming from someone who had long managed her public image meticulously, this was an enormous gesture. More than that, Camilla had been quietly building alliances, speaking with members of the House of Lords, senior parliamentarians, and influential legal figures, laying the groundwork for the political battle ahead. Her motivation was personal. She had watched Charlotte grow up and would not allow centuries-old laws to dictate the child's future. Catherine was genuinely moved by this unexpected solidarity. The personal and political had intertwined, one woman supporting another in defense of the next generation. They talked for hours, with Camilla sharing stories of her own decades navigating palace life, the compromises she had made, battles she chose to fight, and those she had let go. She had lived under the constant weight of expectation and did not want Charlotte to inherit that shadow. By the time Camilla left, a plan was set in motion. She would attend a charity gala focused on women's education and empowerment on December 4th, delivering a speech carefully worded yet unmistakably clear about the importance of aligning British laws with modern values of equality. Charlotte would not be named, she wouldn't need to be, but everyone would understand the message. The risk was real. Some might accuse Camilla of overstepping, involving herself in political matters beyond her remit, and conservative critics could seize on the speech to reopen old controversies. But Camilla had reached a point where she was less concerned about perception and more focused on principle. Camilla had long prioritized principle over universal approval, caring more about being able to look at herself in the mirror than pleasing everyone. When William and Catherine learned of her intentions, William's reaction mixed gratitude with concern. He understood the personal and public risks Camilla was willing to take for Charlotte's sake. That night he spoke with her in a private conversation lasting nearly an hour. While the details remain confidential, sources suggest it marked a turning point in their relationship, shared purpose forging bonds that years of careful politeness never had. King Charles learned of Camilla's plans the following morning. His response was layered: pride in her courage, worry about the potential backlash, and recognition that she was acting according to her conscience, regardless of personal cost. He did not attempt to dissuade her, having long accepted that Camilla made her own decisions. He instead offered his support, ensuring she would not stand alone publicly. The palace machinery went into overdrive. Speech drafts were written and meticulously vetted to ensure Camilla's words could not be construed as direct interference in parliamentary processes. Yet the core message remained unaltered. The law, as it stood, was unjust, and justice demanded reform. On the morning of December 4th, as Camilla prepared for the event that would prove pivotal, she received a note delivered to her private rooms. It was from Charlotte herself, written in the careful handwriting of a 9-year-old girl caught in the center of a constitutional crisis. The note was brief: "Thank you for being brave. Love, Charlotte." Camilla kept it and keeps it still. Parliament returned from its autumn recess on December 2nd to a political landscape dominated by the succession crisis. Leaks over the weekend had made Charlotte's removal public, and the palace's attempts at containment had failed, as they inevitably do in the digital age. By Monday morning, the story had spread everywhere. Public reaction was exactly as Catherine and William had anticipated: outrage, disbelief, and demands for immediate action. Social media erupted with hashtags supporting Charlotte. Newspapers and online platforms ran think pieces dissecting the historical roots of succession discrimination, calling for comprehensive reform. Morning news programs featured constitutional experts explaining the archaic provisions in tones ranging from bemused to appalled. In the House of Commons, the Prime Minister faced immediate pressure. Opposition leaders demanded emergency debates, and backbenchers from all parties expressed concern. The Scottish National Party used the crisis to renew calls for abolishing the monarchy, though they were a minority voice. Remarkably, a broad consensus emerged across most of the political spectrum. The discriminatory provisions could not stand. However, consensus on principle did not translate into consensus on process. Conservative traditionalists advocated measured review, committee processes, and careful consideration of constitutional implications. Some suggested examining whether the assessments could be updated rather than eliminated. That argument, however, was swiftly dismantled. Women MPs from all parties denounced it, highlighting whether any male MP would tolerate his son being subjected to such scrutiny. Conservative MPs with daughters stressed the damaging message these provisions sent to young women across Britain. Even the staunchest traditionalists struggled to defend laws explicitly treating female royals as suspects simply for being female. On December 3rd, the Liberal Democrats introduced emergency legislation, the Gender Equality and Royal Succession Act. It was brief, comprehensive, and unambiguous. The bill repealed all provisions that treated male and female heirs differently, immediately restored Princess Charlotte to the succession list, and mandated a full audit of royal-related legislation to ensure no other discriminatory provisions remained in the legal code. The government's response was cautious. The Prime Minister expressed sympathy with the bill's objectives, but raised procedural concerns about its rapid passage. Emergency legislation that bypassed the normal committee scrutiny naturally raised concerns. Critics worried about unintended consequences or constitutional loopholes that might emerge, arguing that moving quickly, while necessary, still required caution. Under ordinary circumstances, a measured approach might have prevailed, but these were anything but ordinary circumstances. Camilla's speech on December 4th shifted the political calculus entirely. Standing before an audience of women leaders and advocates, the Queen Consort delivered measured yet unmistakable remarks on the importance of institutions reflecting the values they claim to uphold, the responsibility of each generation to correct past injustices, and the duty of those in positions of privilege to use their platforms for progress. She never explicitly mentioned Charlotte or the succession, yet every attendee and viewer immediately understood the target of her message. The impact was profound. Conservative MPs who might have resisted change suddenly found themselves politically untenable, as even the Queen Consort had endorsed reform. On December 5th, Parliament debated the emergency legislation in a historic session. MPs filled the chamber to capacity, with overflow crowds in the galleries. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the sense of participating in a momentous event. Speakers shared personal stories, invoking daughters and granddaughters, transforming abstract law into something visceral. Opposition came mainly from a small faction concerned about precedent, notably Lord Wetherby, who warned that changing succession laws under public pressure could open dangerous doors, questioning where it might end. Baroness Chen's response was pointed and simple. It would end with equality, when the law treated all citizens, including royals, with basic dignity and fairness. By the evening, the outcome was clear. The House of Commons would pass the Gender Equality and Royal Succession Act by an overwhelming majority, with the House of Lords following within days. King Charles would grant royal assent immediately, restoring Princess Charlotte to the succession list before Christmas. Even with the victory, the crisis highlighted how close disaster had come. Had palace officials succeeded in keeping the issue quiet or persuaded the Wales family to comply with the outdated assessment process, the provisions might have lingered indefinitely. The episode exposed the complacency of the establishment, and while the immediate crisis was resolved, the work of reform had only just begun. Charlotte's situation revealed a stark gap between Britain's self-image as a modern egalitarian society and the legal reality shaped by centuries-old prejudices. Correcting this one provision was necessary but insufficient. True change required sustained effort, political will, and vigilance. The Gender Equality and Royal Succession Act received royal assent on December 7, 2025, in a brief ceremony that reflected the complicated emotions of the moment. Pride that justice had been restored, regret that a crisis was needed to force action, and determination that this marked a genuine turning point. Princess Charlotte was officially restored to the succession list on December 8, 2025, with the palace issuing a concise statement acknowledging Parliament's modernization of succession law. The understatement was deliberate, signaling a desire to move forward from a traumatic episode. The implications of those 10 chaotic days will resonate for decades. The monarchy confronted uncomfortable truths about the disparity between its public image and its legal reality, revealing that much of its modernization had been superficial, leaving deeper structures intact. For Charlotte, the lesson was less about legal minutiae and more about the unwavering support of her parents and grandmother in the face of injustice, a lesson likely to outlast any constitutional detail. The crisis also shifted dynamics within the royal family. William and Catherine emerged more willing to challenge protocol, prioritizing their children's well-being over institutional convenience, a departure from the ethos of duty that defined the Elizabethan era. King Charles now navigates the delicate balance between supporting his family and preserving institutional stability. Meanwhile, the parliamentary audit mandated by the emergency legislation has already uncovered numerous royal provisions failing contemporary equality standards. Some are easily removed, but others are embedded in complex constitutional structures, requiring years of careful reform, a long-term task ensuring that the monarchy aligns with the values it publicly espouses. Exactly. Charlotte's crisis wasn't just a momentary disruption. It acted like a spotlight, revealing deep-seated structural problems that had been ignored for centuries. The event forced the monarchy, parliament, and the public to confront uncomfortable truths. Modernization isn't just cosmetic, and equality doesn't happen by assumption. The revelation about Princess Charlotte's removal from the succession list has exposed long-standing cracks in the monarchy, prompting momentum for comprehensive reform. There is now a recognition that partial measures, updating website language, or social media strategies are insufficient. Modernizing the monarchy requires examining every legal and constitutional foundation and being willing to rebuild where necessary. Charlotte's crisis has also sparked broader conversations about hereditary privilege, highlighting that the monarchy must justify its existence beyond tradition and tourism and demonstrate genuine value to British society. Her experience made clear that that value cannot come from perpetuating discrimination, even historical discrimination without malicious intent. Internationally, reactions have been mixed. Republics see it as evidence of the monarchy's anachronism, while other constitutional monarchies, including Spain, Belgium, and the Netherlands, are reviewing their own succession laws to avoid similar crises. For the British public, the episode has been galvanizing. Polls show overwhelming support for emergency legislation, and for Charlotte herself, as the image of a young girl removed from succession because of her gender made abstract constitutional questions immediate and personal. This public investment has positioned Charlotte as a symbol of progress, a heavy burden for a 9-year-old, though William and Catherine are striving to ensure she has a normal childhood despite her public profile. The media's role has also been scrutinized. Leaks from palace sources brought the issue to light, and journalists faced ethical dilemmas about reporting on a child, ultimately prioritizing public interest in exposing unjust laws. Looking forward, Charlotte's experience is likely to shape her future royal role, teaching her that institutions do not always act justly without pressure, that change requires courage, and that privilege comes with responsibility. Her siblings are affected too. George, at 11, understands the unfairness and will carry those lessons into his eventual kingship, while Louis, at 6, will grow up in a family more questioning of tradition and committed to public service. The palace itself is undergoing cultural shifts, emphasizing training, principled decision-making, and systems to prevent harm. Public attitudes continue to evolve, and the monarchy must continuously demonstrate relevance, value, and adherence to contemporary values. Charlotte's crisis, though painful, may provide a roadmap, showing that the monarchy can acknowledge failures, correct them, and prioritize individual dignity over institutional inertia. The young princess has returned to school and daily life, but she has witnessed the power of advocacy and the work required for progress. What happens next will shape not only Charlotte's future but the monarchy's survival in the 21st century, proving that the fight for equality is never truly finished.